It's terrifying when your child is alive, but his eyes are empty. Drew was once the light of Tate's life, but after the accident, the boy no longer spoke, no longer laughed, and no longer met anyone's gaze. Tate, even as a millionaire, could only sit by his son's side each night and whisper into the empty air, until the day they met Penny, a poor girl, but one whose heart could reach places that money never could. Tate Donovan was once the epitome of modern success, a self-made millionaire who built his career from scratch, emerging from multi-million-dollar real estate deals with a confident smile. He not only ran his own company, but was also invited to speak at major financial conferences from Los Angeles to Austin. Yet all of that glory became a hollow luxury the afternoon nearly 2 years ago. That day, his wife Eliza and their son Drew were on their way home after a family birthday celebration. Tate, as usual, was stuck in a meeting. A sudden downpour sent their SUV skidding into a concrete barrier on the highway. Eliza did not survive. Drew lived, but the boy lost forever, both his ability to walk and the bright spark that once shone in his eyes. Tate has never forgiven himself. He tried everything money could buy: top-tier physical therapy, a Stanford psychologist, music and animal-assisted therapies, even neurocellular treatment from Europe. But Drew remained silent. The boy neither cried nor laughed, and he never looked anyone in the eye, not even his father. Inside the lavish Scottsdale mansion, Tate felt like a hollow echo of power. The silence between him and Drew made every step feel unbearably heavy. No laughter. No childish questions. Not even the sulky tantrums of a 9-year-old. Only those empty eyes, as if the boy had withdrawn completely from the world. He often sat beside Drew's bed, rereading the stories Eliza used to tell. He didn't expect a response, only hoped, somewhere beneath the silence, his son could still hear. Yet, despite all those efforts and fragile hopes, Tate remained a helpless father, wealthy but hollow. One Friday morning, when his assistant postponed a meeting after a partner canceled at the last minute, Tate made an unexpected decision. He would take Drew along on a short trip to Flagstaff. He offered no explanation. He simply wanted to get his son out of the daily suffocation. They drove for 3 hours through pine forests, rocky hills, and the memories he once shared with Eliza. Drew stayed silent, eyes glued to the window. Tate didn't expect anything. But it was in that very hopelessness that something quietly began. Around midday, he pulled into a shabby roadside cafe. No fancy sign, no glittering lights, just a small wooden house with handwritten letters on the window. Hot coffee. Free smiles. Tate stepped inside, carrying Drew in his arms. And that was the first time he met Penny. She was a petite girl in a faded apron, her curly hair hastily tied back and eyes that seemed strangely familiar. She didn't rush or prattle on. She simply bowed her head in greeting and gave them a simple smile, as though they were just ordinary customers. But within minutes, in some inexplicable way, Penny had lightened the entire space. A server who looked like anyone else turned out to be like no one at all. Some encounters aren't on the schedule, but change everything. Could this be one of them?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
The wooden door of the weathered diner creaked as Tate pushed it open. Inside, nothing stood out. Just a few scratched wooden tables and chairs, a small bar counter, and the warm aroma of roasted coffee mingled with the scent of freshly baked pastries. Not the sort of place a millionaire like him usually frequented, yet there was a peacefulness here, as if the outside world had let him go for a moment. Penny emerged from behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour, curly brown hair tied back with a few strands escaping to frame sun-kissed cheekbones. She didn't know who they were, nor did she need to. Her gaze bore no hint of judgment, only gentle hospitality, like the greeting you'd receive in a small hometown cafe. Tate chose the table by the window. He set Drew into the chair opposite him, tucking a blanket around the boy's legs with practiced care. Drew said nothing, his eyes staring blankly at the street beyond. Penny brought them 2 glasses of water and a sheet of drawing paper with a handful of well-worn colored pencils. She placed them in front of Drew, saying nothing, merely offering a small nod. Tate opened his mouth to thank her, but Penny had already turned away, subtly preventing any awkwardness. When she returned, she carried a napkin on which she had sketched a birthday hat-up dinosaur blowing a party horn. The doodle was rough, yet somehow full of life. Penny laid the napkin before Drew, then sank to her knees to meet him at eye level. She didn't look directly at him, only tilted her head as if whispering to an imaginary friend. "You know," she said in a low, gentle voice like a breeze, "when this little dinosaur was young, it didn't know how to smile, until it realized it wasn't alone." No one spoke. Tate watched his son, those same empty eyes, but for the first time they rested on something. The drawing. Drew neither grabbed it nor spoke, but he did not look away. A tiny spark, as fragile as warmth in a cold room. Tate dared not breathe. He saw Drew's hand lightly touch the napkin. The boy's finger traced the outline of the dinosaur slowly. Not a grand reaction, but the very first response in nearly 2 years. Something that dozens of $1,000 therapies had never achieved. Penny rose without another word, leaving behind only a faint, knowing smile. She had no psychology degree, no special training. Yet somehow she understood, not through intellect, but through experience. Through that intuition only those who have walked through pain can possess. Through the rest of their meal, Tate remained silent. He didn't force conversation or feel the need to speak. He simply sat there, watching Drew touch the paper a few more times and then gently place it on his lap as if safeguarding something precious. When they left, Drew didn't look back, but he gripped the napkin tightly. Tate said nothing, only glanced at Penny one more time. She nodded in lieu of a farewell, as if she had known them for years. There was no drama, no sudden miracle. Yet one thing was certain, something had changed. That night, back at the hotel, Tate found Drew asleep with the crumpled napkin clutched in his arms. Not a stuffed animal, not an expensive therapeutic device, just a scrap of paper with a smiling dinosaur drawn on it. And he knew, if anyone could step into Drew's silent world, it was that girl, the one who had lit a candle in a place he thought was extinguished. Could a napkin become the key to opening up an entire world? Perhaps, if it's given by the right person. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then stay tuned for the rest of the story. More surprises await. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this tale, so we know you're still here. Tate hadn't planned on returning to the little cafe on the outskirts of Flagstaff, yet he found himself going back, not for the coffee, nor for the pastries, but for something hard to name, perhaps the look in Drew's eyes as he gazed at that napkin, or the way the boy clutched it like a treasure as he fell asleep. At first, it was coincidental. A meeting postponed, an excuse to drop by, and the car slowing before the old wooden frame. But gradually, it became a quiet ritual. Tate and Drew would appear on slow afternoons. Penny seemed always there, never asking questions, never prying. She would simply place a fresh napkin on the table, each one bearing a different drawing. One day, a sunglasses-wearing fox. Another, an elephant playing drums. On another, a crude treasure map sketched in hasty lines. The strange thing was that Drew no longer just stared. The boy began to draw in return. At first, his strokes were clumsy lines. Then shapes grew clearer. One day, Penny received from him a napkin depicting a dinosaur, this time roaring with laughter, standing beside a small figure with curly hair. No one said a word. Yet Penny folded that paper carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. Tate realized he was witnessing a miracle not born of any therapy or plan, but arising from someone who understood that silence itself can heal. And then, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he found himself watching Penny. The 24-year-old lived a life so achingly simple. No one would guess that behind her gentle smiles and hand-drawn napkins lay a long journey of sacrifice. Tate overheard the story from the cafe's owner. Penny had studied psychology at Arizona State University, an excellent student, even nominated for scholarships. But at 19, her mother died of cancer. Her father disappeared without a trace, and Penny was forced to give up everything to care for her sister, who suffered from severe autism. Her sister, Lily, now lived in a part-time support center. Penny juggled 2 jobs to make ends meet, serving morning shifts at the cafe and helping sell flowers in the evenings. She never complained, never sought sympathy. She simply lived, smiled, and drew, because those were the only things she still held for herself. Tate had never met anyone like her. Everyone he'd known, no matter how accomplished, had goals, ambitions. Penny was different. She lived through her presence. That quiet strength made him feel small. And, to his surprise, he saw himself reflected in her. Inside Tate was also a wasteland. An imperfect father, a businessman full of cracks, a man who had lost laughter in his own home. Yet one day, when he saw Drew lean across to Penny to hand her a single green-colored pencil, a simple gesture that had never happened in 2 years, he suddenly understood. It wasn't Penny who healed Drew. It was Drew himself being awakened from within by the presence of someone who did not try to fix him. One March midday, as the first spring sunlight streamed through the windows, Penny sat behind the counter, affixing old drawings to a corner of the wall. Tate approached, not trying to appear familiar, simply standing beside her and observing the cluster of napkin sketches pinned up like a miniature exhibition. Each drawing marked a silent journey, no applause, no formal recognition, yet genuine milestones. Penny turned and gave a gentle smile. She didn't need to ask, because she already knew. And Tate didn't need to speak, for the look in his eyes in that moment, the eyes of a father who had just witnessed his child come back to life, said it all. There was no contract between them, no promises exchanged. But from that day on, Tate no longer entered the cafe as a mere customer. He came as though returning to a place that had once been home. Perhaps sometimes the strongest bond needs no words, no reasons, only someone choosing to stay long enough to listen. Dear viewers, stay tuned for the next installment that will leave you speechless. Please take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all around the world. Not all beautiful moments last forever, and not every bond can withstand the trials of reality. That midday began like any other peaceful day. Sunlight filtered through the dusty, fogged glass, casting mottled patches of light across the old wooden bar counter. Penny was wiping the counter, Drew was drawing. Tate sat by the window quietly sipping his coffee, his eyes following every small motion between the other two with a look even he couldn't name. Until a man walked in, someone who didn't belong here. A crisp suit, polished leather shoes, phone in hand playing a video. He approached Tate, paused a few steps away, and smiled as if greeting an old acquaintance. "Mr. Donovan," he said louder than necessary. "I read your interview in Forbes last week. That photo of you in your office, it was very striking." The diner seemed to freeze. Penny looked up. Drew paused his pencil. Tate set his cup down without turning, but he knew this moment was coming. He just hadn't expected it so soon. The man went on, but Tate couldn't make out the words. His ears rang with growing confusion. The introductions, the handshakes, the compliments, once a source of pride, now sounded harshly echoing. He felt stripped bare in a place he had believed was safe. Penny stood motionless behind the counter, her expression unchanged, but her gaze had shifted. No longer gentle, no longer warm, but distant and suspicious. After the man left, no one spoke. Tate moved toward Penny, intending to explain something, but no words would come. And before he could begin, she spoke first softly, yet as cold as a mountain wind. "So you're the one on the magazine cover," she said, her eyes fixed on the cloth in her hand. "The millionaire investor. Were you pretending?" There was no anger in her voice, only a silent fracture, the kind of disappointment no one hears, but which hurts far more than any shout. Tate stood there, neither denying nor defending himself. He never intended to hide his identity, but he had never thought he needed to reveal it. For the first time, he just wanted to be a father, not a CEO, not a success icon, not the face of Donovan Capital, yet perhaps that very silence had become the distance between them. He quietly left the cafe. Drew didn't understand what had happened, but he sensed the unusual tension. The boy gripped his father's hand tightly on the drive home, his eyes not sad, just vague, as if losing a habit he had only just regained. That night, Drew sat drawing as usual, but for the first time in many days, Tate did not sit beside him. He stood out on the hotel balcony, holding an untouched glass of whiskey, his gaze fixed on the distant, misty mountain range. He was all too familiar with loss, losing his wife, losing his son's laughter, and now possibly losing the only person who had brought that laughter back. When he returned inside, Drew was already asleep. The napkin lay on the table, the colored pencil uncapped. Yet, it was that very drawing that made Tate freeze in his tracks. On the napkin, Drew had drawn 3 figures: a curly-haired adult, a tall man, and a small child holding their hands. Above them loomed a gray cloud, casting its shadow. But in the rain, there was a single umbrella sheltering all 3, as if both adults had extended their arms to protect the child. There were no smiles on their faces. Yet, there was presence. There was a bond. The picture needed no words. It was the final message of a child who didn't yet know how to speak it out loud, but understood more than anyone. Has anyone ever walked away, only to realize that the place they truly belong has been there all along? There are some deeds that need no audience, and there are wounds that only heal when no one tries to touch them. Tate did not return to the cafe. No phone call, no explanation. He knew he had hurt Penny, not by what he did, but by his silence. But he also knew better than anyone how it felt to be regarded as merchandise in need of fixing. He had hated that, and he knew Penny did too. So instead of going back to apologize, he chose to step back quietly, without a trace. He started where she could not see. The medical support program at the center, where Lily Penny's sister studied. Unpaid medical bills were settled silently through the anonymous community aid fund he backed. Lily's tuition was reduced to a mere fraction. She was even enrolled in the new art therapy class that Penny once couldn't afford. Then came the cafe. Not a buyout or remodeling. Just several ingredient orders prepaid 6 months in advance, and brand new baking equipment sent as overstock from a supplier without any donor name attached. No one knew. And that was Tate's intention. Because if kindness carries conditions, it ceases to be healing and becomes pity masquerading as goodwill. He returned to Scottsdale after nearly 3 weeks. Drew seemed quiet again, but not as closed off as before. He still drew, and in a new painting, Tate recognized a familiar image, a scorched field being reclaimed by green shoots. The title, scrawled in Drew's wobbly handwriting, read, "Phoenix." A week later, on an April afternoon, Tate received a handwritten letter, no return address. But the handwriting he could never forget. Inside was a single napkin sketched on it, a phoenix spreading its wings to shelter two small figures below, a girl and a boy in a wheelchair. At the bottom, a brief line. I never needed you, but maybe I needed something with you. A few days later, Penny returned. No announcement, no fanfare. She stood before Tate's office holding a design sketch. Not because he was a millionaire, not because of the silent gifts, but because throughout all that time he had never once asked to be forgiven, never tried to turn his kindness into a boast. You never once tried to make me feel indebted, she said, as they sat facing each other in that vast, silent space. And it's precisely that made me want to come back. Tate said nothing, but he understood. This return wasn't about reigniting a romance, it was a step taken together, something greater than two individuals. And Penny wasn't back to be loved. She was back to do something for children who had never been heard. A few months later, Phoenix Field opened its doors, a center for art and physical therapy for children with disabilities. There was no grand sign, no Tate or Penny's names etched in stone. But Drew's paintings were printed on the walls. There was laughter, the sound of piano keys, the whisper of wheelchair wheels rolling down wooden hallways. And most important, there were children who could not speak, yet for the first time learned how to smile. Tate was no longer the man on a magazine cover. Penny was no longer the waitress wiping cups each morning. They were simply two people who chose to walk side by side, no obligations, no titles, only companionship. And Drew, who had once lived in silence, had become the very first inspiration for children just like him. Perhaps true healing does not begin with words, but with unconditional presence. But can a bond built in silence step into the light? The opening day of Phoenix Field took place on a clear June afternoon. The sky was washed a pure blue, without a single wisp of cloud. Pearl-colored balloons floated lazily on the breeze, brushing against white ribbons draped along the entrance. Children laughed as wheelchairs glided down the gleaming wooden halls, and on every wall hung paintings not by famous artists, but by the children who once could not speak. In the courtyard, a small platform had been set up, unassuming, just large enough for a few people to stand, and standing upon it was Drew, the boy who had not uttered a word for nearly 2 years. Today, he wore a white shirt and held a small microphone, his lips trembling slightly. Tate stood at the edge of the courtyard beside Penny. No one spoke. They simply watched Drew, not with pressure or expectation, but as if welcoming an unhurried miracle. Drew looked around. He drew in a deep breath. The entire courtyard fell silent, not from curiosity, but from respect. Then, word by word, slowly but clearly, he spoke. Back then, I thought I would never smile again. A gentle breeze stirred. The balloons swayed ever so slightly, as if breathing with him. But now I have my father, I have Miss Penny, and I have Phoenix Field, a place where I know I'm not broken, a place where I know I am still me. No applause followed immediately. Some moments require no clapping, only listening. Drew lowered his head. A smile flickered across his lips. Not perfect, but unmistakably his own. Penny squeezed Tate's hand gently. He said nothing, but he could feel his heart beating in time with his son's breath. After the ceremony, Drew was surrounded by the other children, those who had once been like him, now holding his hand, sharing drawing paper, exchanging colored pencils, without needing many words. Penny and Tate stood back at a distance, like two adults who understood that a milestone had just been passed without any need for formal recognition. They sat together in the small room at the end of the hallway, once Penny's old art studio, now an art therapy workshop. On the wall was the painting Drew had made last week: a green field, a red-roofed house, and 3 figures holding hands. "You don't need to name it," Penny had once said, "but when someone is home, you just know when you're with them." That day ended with late afternoon sunlight stretching through the windows. Drew lay with his head on Penny's lap, clutching his sketchbook. Tate sat beside them. No laptop, no busyness, just a father, now a man who understood that some values can't be measured in wealth or fame. Once on the cover of Forbes, Tate now saw clearly. Everything he had built, corporations, office towers, shareholder equity, couldn't make his son smile. But a waitress with a scribbled napkin and a small studio for forgotten children could. A person's true wealth isn't in a bank balance. It's in a child's grateful gaze, in the quiet presence of someone who chose to stay when there was nothing in it for them. Penny didn't become his wife, at least, not yet, but she was the first person Drew ran to each morning, the one who always had an extra colored pencil in her apron pocket, the one who never asked, "What are you to me?" but always asked, "What did Drew draw today?" No one knows what comes after Phoenix Field, but they know one thing. Once you witness someone's heart come back to life, you can never leave. Because there, you begin to breathe again yourself. So what is your true wealth in life? Perhaps the most precious thing isn't what we own, but who is willing to stay when we have nothing left to give? The story of Tate, Penny, and Drew reminds us that healing sometimes doesn't come from grand deeds, but from someone who listens, from a hand-drawn napkin or from a small umbrella in an emotional storm. You don't have to be a millionaire to change someone's world. You just need to be present, truly present, with a gentle heart and a selfless spirit. Have you ever met someone who made you smile again after days you thought you were broken? Share that story with us in the comments. We read every single one, especially at night. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone you believe needs a ray of light in a cloudy day. Because you might just be the reason someone smiles again today.